Kyle Thompson always knew how to stay out of trouble. He learned that in a town where power belonged to the wealthy and privileged, the only way to live peacefully was to stay silent. But when his younger sister Emma became the target of the school's most powerful bully, Logan Hayes, everything changed. One day Kyle discovered Emma cornered in the schoolyard, pressured to submit to Logan's taunts. But she refused to back down, and Logan shoved her to the ground. In front of the shocked crowd, Kyle stepped forward, no longer the quiet kid. But he had no idea that this wasn't just a simple confrontation. It would trigger a chain of shocking events, forcing him into a battle against an entire system of injustice. Can Kyle fight back and reclaim justice? Or will he be crushed under the weight of power and lies? Stay until the end to uncover the unexpected truth. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on more inspiring stories. Kyle Thompson grew up learning the unspoken rules of survival in Cedar Ridge, a town where power belonged to those who had influence, money, or the right last name. He had neither. From a young age, he understood that blending in was the safest option. His mother, who worked 2 jobs to provide for him and his younger sister Emma, often reminded him to focus on school, stay out of trouble, and never draw attention. But his grandfather, Henry Thompson, a retired boxer with hands still scarred from years in the ring, taught him a different lesson. A man can only be pushed so far before he has to push back, Henry would say, his deep voice carrying the weight of experience. He had trained Kyle not for aggression, but for discipline. Every weekend, Kyle would practice footwork, balance, and defense in their garage-turned-gym. He had power in his fists, but he had never once used it outside of their practice sessions. He never needed to. He avoided fights, ignored insults, and let trouble pass him by. But trouble had found Emma. Emma was 12, still young enough to believe in fairness, but old enough to recognize when something was wrong. His father had built a legacy of influence, ensuring that no mistake his son made would ever come with consequences. Logan was used to getting his way, and when he didn't, he made sure people suffered for it. At first, Logan's attention toward Emma seemed harmless, just teasing in the hallways, small remarks that she brushed off. But it escalated quickly. Her books went missing. Notes appeared on her locker with insults scribbled across them. She stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria because Logan and his friends had started taking her food and throwing it in the trash. Kyle noticed how she walked home faster, how she flinched slightly whenever someone called her name too loudly. Still, she didn't complain. She didn't want to be a burden. Then one day, everything changed. Kyle was heading home from school, his backpack slung over his shoulder, lost in thought when he heard the unmistakable sound of laughter, sharp, mocking, and laced with cruelty. His body tensed. He had heard that kind of laughter before. It was the sound of someone enjoying another person's humiliation. He turned the corner near the gas station and saw them. Emma stood against a brick wall, her backpack dangling from Logan's grip, held just out of her reach. Logan smirked, tilting his head as he spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Come on, Emma," he taunted. "Say it. Admit you don't belong here, and maybe I'll give this back." Emma clenched her fists. "Go to hell." Logan's smirk widened, amused. "Wrong answer," he said, shoving her lightly, just enough to make her stumble. Kyle moved before he even had time to think. One moment he was watching from a distance. The next he was in front of Logan, grabbing his wrist before he could reach for Emma again. The laughter died instantly. Logan's eyes flicked to Kyle, momentarily surprised before amusement returned to his face. "Oh, look," he drawled. "Big brother's here to play hero." "Let her go," Kyle said, his voice steady. Logan yanked his arm back, laughing. "Relax, man, we're just having fun." Kyle didn't answer. His gaze flicked to Emma. She was breathing fast but still standing tall, chin raised. That was enough. She didn't need to see him lose control. She didn't need to see him give Logan exactly what he wanted to fight. "It's over," Kyle said finally. "We're leaving." Logan chuckled and took a step closer, testing boundaries. "Or what? You gonna hit me, Thompson?" Kyle didn't move, didn't blink. He could feel the heat of anger bubbling beneath his skin, the tight coil in his muscles demanding action. But he knew better. If he hit Logan, he wouldn't just be fighting one bully, he'd be fighting the entire system that protected him. He turned away, grabbing Emma's hand, and pulled her toward the street. Behind him, Logan laughed, smug and victorious. That's what I thought. You're just like everyone else, too scared to do anything about it. Kyle kept walking, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. He knew this wasn't over. Logan had made a mistake. He thought Kyle was scared. He thought Kyle would always back down. He had no idea what was coming. That night, Kyle couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Logan smirk, heard his laughter, his fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. His whole body itched with the frustration of knowing that the right thing walking away felt like the worst thing. At the dinner table, the tension was thick. Their mother was still at work, leaving just Kyle, Emma, and Henry. The old man watched them in silence for a while before speaking. "You gonna tell me what happened?" Kyle hesitated. He didn't want to say it out loud, didn't want to make it real. But Emma spoke first. "It was Logan," she muttered, stabbing at her mashed potatoes with her fork. Henry's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He looked at Kyle. "You do anything about it?" Kyle tightened his grip on his fork. Henry let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. Huh. That was it. No lecture, no disappointed sigh. Just that sound, deep and thoughtful. Kyle pushed back his chair and stood up. "I'm going to the garage." Henry didn't stop him. The garage had been their training ground for years. Punching bags, weights, a speed bag swinging lightly from the ceiling. Kyle pulled off his hoodie, his body already moving before his mind could catch up. His fists slammed into the heavy bag over and over, his knuckles burning against the worn leather. He hit harder, faster, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He saw Logan's face every time he swung. Imagine knocking the smirk clean off. A hand caught the bag, stopping its swing. Kyle froze. Henry stood in front of him, arms crossed, his face calm but unreadable. "You fight like you're already mad at yourself," he said. Kyle swallowed, staring at the floor. Henry studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Let me guess. You wanted to hit him, but you didn't. And now you're wondering if you made the wrong choice." Kyle clenched his fists, his shoulders tense. "He wanted me to swing. He was waiting for it. If I hit him, I would have been the one in trouble, not him." Henry nodded. "Yeah, you're right." Kyle looked up, caught off guard. He had expected some kind of speech about standing up for himself. Henry let go of the bag and stepped back. "You were smart, boy. But being smart don't always feel good. Does it?" Kyle exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Henry ran a hand over his beard, thinking. "You're playing by their rules. You're waiting for them to be fair, for them to see reason. But they won't." His voice was steady, but something sharp lingered underneath it. "Bullies like Logan don't stop until they're made to stop. And when you do hit back," he leaned in slightly, "you better make damn sure it counts." Kyle swallowed hard, his heartbeat still hammering in his ears. Henry patted the punching bag. "So keep hitting. But when the time comes, don't just throw punches. Win." Kyle didn't know it yet, but that time was coming sooner than he thought. Kyle spent the rest of the evening trying to push the anger out of his system, but it clung to him like a shadow. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. His jaw ached from grinding his teeth too hard. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Logan's smirk, heard his mocking laughter, and felt the heat of humiliation creeping up his spine. The worst part was not that Logan had gotten away with it. The worst part was that Logan thought Kyle was weak, that he would always back down. At the dinner table, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Their mother was still at work, leaving just Kyle, Emma, and their grandfather, Henry. The old man watched them in silence, his sharp eyes flicking between the two siblings, before he finally spoke. "You going to tell me what happened?" Kyle hesitated. He did not want to talk about it. Saying it out loud would make it real, and real meant facing the fact that he had walked away, that Logan had won. But before he could say anything, Emma spoke first. "It was Logan again," she muttered, pushing her food around her plate. Henry's expression remained calm, but something shifted in his gaze, something darker, something knowing. He turned to Kyle. "You do anything about it?" Kyle tightened his grip on his fork. Henry exhaled, slow and measured. That was it. No lecture, no sigh of disappointment, just a quiet sound that spoke volumes. But Kyle knew what it meant. He pushed back his chair and stood up. "I'm going to the garage." Henry did not stop him. The garage had been their training ground for years, filled with the ghosts of old fights and the echoes of lessons passed down through generations. The heavy bag hung from the ceiling, its surface worn from years of use. The speed bag rested in the corner, waiting for the rhythm of quick, controlled strikes. The wooden floor, scuffed and dented, had absorbed the force of countless punches, countless frustrations unleashed. Kyle threw off his hoodie, his body already moving before his mind could catch up. His fists slammed into the heavy bag, each strike harder than the last, the burn in his knuckles feeding the fire in his chest. He hit faster, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. He saw Logan's face every time he swung. Imagine knocking that smug look right off of him. A hand caught the bag, stopping its swing. Kyle froze, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. Henry stood in front of him, arms crossed, his face calm but unreadable. "You fight like you are already mad at yourself," he said. Kyle swallowed, staring at the floor. Henry studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Let me guess. You wanted to hit him, but you did not. And now you are wondering if you made the wrong choice." Kyle clenched his fists, his shoulders tense. "He wanted me to swing. He was waiting for it. If I hit him, I would have been the one in trouble, not him." Henry nodded. "Yeah, you are right." Kyle looked up, caught off guard. He had expected some kind of speech about standing up for himself, about never backing down. Henry let go of the bag and took a step back. "You were smart, boy. But being smart does not always feel good, does it?" Kyle exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Henry ran a hand over his beard, thinking, "You are playing by their rules. You are waiting for them to be fair, for them to see reason. But they will not." His voice was steady, but something sharp lingered underneath it. "Bullies like Logan do not stop until they are made to stop. And when you do hit back," he leaned in slightly, "you better make damn sure it counts." Kyle swallowed hard, his heartbeat still hammering in his ears. Henry patted the punching bag. "So keep hitting. But when the time comes, do not just throw punches. Win." Kyle did not know it yet, but that time was coming sooner than he thought. 2 days later, after school, Kyle was heading out of the gym after basketball practice, his muscles aching from exhaustion. He had spent the last 48 hours trying to convince himself that maybe Logan would back off, that maybe after their last encounter, he would find someone else to torment. He was wrong. He heard Emma's voice first, not a scream, but something close, sharp, angry. Kyle's stomach dropped. He turned the corner behind the school and saw her. Emma was on the ground, her backpack spilled beside her, books scattered across the pavement. Logan stood over her, smirking, his friends hanging back just enough to watch, but not enough to be part of it. Kyle did not think. He did not hesitate. In seconds, he was there, standing between Emma and Logan, his breath steady, his hands loose at his sides, but ready. Logan's smirk widened. "Oh, look," he drawled. "Big brother's back. You here to walk away again?" Kyle did not respond. He did not need to. His silence was enough. Logan laughed. "Come on, Thompson, do something." Kyle did not move. He did not flinch. He stayed still, steady. Then Logan swung. The punch was sloppy, all anger and no technique. Kyle saw it coming a mile away. He sidestepped at the last second. Logan's fist cutting through empty air, the momentum throwing him off balance just enough for Kyle to make his move. One hit, a sharp, controlled jab to the ribs. Not reckless, not wild. Just enough force to send a message. Logan gasped, stumbling back, his face twisting with shock. His friends were not laughing anymore. Logan straightened, his face red with humiliation, with fury. He swung again, but this time Kyle did not just dodge. He stepped in. A quick, clean movement, an elbow to Logan's shoulder, sending him further off balance. Another step and a firm shove sent Logan stumbling back, arms flailing, barely catching himself before he hit the pavement. Silence. Logan's breasts were ragged, his fists trembling at his sides. Kyle did not move. He did not speak. He just stood there waiting. For the first time, Logan hesitated. He was not sure if he could win this fight. Kyle could see it in his face, the doubt, the uncertainty. And then, just like that, Logan turned and walked away. His friends lingered for a moment, exchanging glances, then hurried after him. Kyle exhaled a slow breath. Beside him, Emma adjusted her backpack, her hands gripping the straps tightly. "You okay?" Kyle nodded. "Are you?" Kyle glanced toward the direction Logan had disappeared. He knew this was not over, not yet. But for the first time, he was not afraid of what came next. Kyle knew that walking away from the fight had not ended anything. Logan might have been humiliated, but bullies like him did not just let things go. Kyle could see it in the way Logan had hesitated before leaving, the way his fists had trembled not just with anger, but with the kind of rage that needed revenge. The next few days at school were tense. The usual whispers in the hallways had changed. Some students watched Kyle with newfound respect, nodding at him as he passed, their eyes filled with something close to admiration. Others, particularly those who had always laughed along with Logan, watched him with suspicion, as if he had broken an unspoken rule by standing up for himself. Emma walked beside him in the hallways now, her head held higher than before. She had always been strong, but this time she was not pretending. She knew Kyle had her back, and for once, she did not feel powerless. But Kyle also knew Logan was not done. He expected retaliation. He just did not know when it would come. The answer came sooner than he thought. It was late in the afternoon when the principal's voice crackled through the school intercom, calling Kyle to the office. He knew immediately what this was. As he made his way down the hallway, students stopped talking, some whispering among themselves, others just watching. It was as if they were waiting to see if Kyle was about to be punished for daring to stand up against Logan. When he stepped into the principal's office, the tension in the room was thick. Principal Reynolds sat behind his desk, his hands folded neatly on top of a stack of papers. But Kyle barely noticed him. His attention was on the other man in the room, Chief Henshaw, Logan's father. He stood near the window, his arms crossed, his uniform crisp and spotless, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His expression was calm, but there was something else in his eyes, a quiet threat. Kyle stood tall, refusing to let himself be intimidated. The principal cleared his throat and gestured for him to sit, but Kyle did not move. "Do you know why you are here?" Kyle's gaze flicked to Chief Henshaw before returning to Reynolds. Number Henshaw let out a low chuckle, shaking his head like Kyle was a child who did not know any better. "Do not play dumb, son. You put my boy in the dirt the other day." Kyle did not flinch. "Your boy put his hands on my sister first." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Henshaw before looking back at Kyle. "We have to address this situation," he said carefully. "Violence of any kind cannot be tolerated at this school." Kyle's hands clenched at his sides. "So you are punishing me for defending my sister?" Henshaw scoffed, stepping forward. "Defending yourself, kid. You are lucky I am not pressing charges. My boy came home bruised, talking about how some thug jumped him." Kyle met his gaze, unblinking. If I had jumped him, he would not have walked away. The air in the room changed. Henshaw's eyes darkened. Principal Reynolds cleared his throat again, shifting nervously in his chair. "We have decided to suspend you, Kyle, indefinitely." Kyle's stomach dropped. He had expected this, but hearing the words still hit like a punch. He glanced at Henshaw, who was smirking now, pleased with himself. "And what about Logan?" Reynolds hesitated. "We will be handling that internally." Kyle let out a bitter laugh. "Right, which means nothing is going to happen to him." Henshaw's smirk widened. "Now you are getting it." Kyle wanted to argue, wanted to fight back, but he knew it would not matter. The decision had been made before he even walked through the door. He turned on his heel and walked out without another word. But as he did, one thought settled deep in his mind. They think they can silence me. They are wrong. That night, Kyle sat on the front porch, staring at the quiet street. His grandfather stepped outside, coffee in hand, and took a seat beside him. "I take it the meeting did not go well." Kyle let out a dry laugh. "They suspended me." Henry did not look surprised. "Logan?" "Nothing. Not even a slap on the wrist." Henry exhaled through his nose. "That is how it is in places like this." Kyle shook his head. So that is it. I just take the hit and move on. Henry studied him for a long moment before setting his mug down. Number, but you have to be smart about what comes next. Kyle frowned. What do you mean? Henry leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. You think you are the only kid Logan has done this to? Kyle blinked. The thought had not really sunk in before, but now that it was in front of him, it was obvious. He was not the only one. He was not even the first. He thought about the way some kids had looked at him in the hallways, the ones who had nodded at him like they were proud, like they had been waiting for someone to finally stand up. Henry's eyes gleamed. What happens when a bully loses a fight? Kyle exhaled. He tries to take back control. Henry nodded. And what happens when everybody he ever pushed around decides they are not scared of him anymore? Kyle understood. Logan might have the school and his father protecting him, but Kyle had something stronger. The truth. And he was not alone. It was time to stop fighting alone. It was time to make them listen. Kyle spent the next 24 hours thinking, not just about what had happened in that office, not just about how easily they had decided to erase him from the school like he was the problem instead of Logan, but about what Henry had said. What happens when everybody he ever pushed around decides they are not scared of him anymore? That question had burrowed into his mind, planting itself so deep he could not ignore it. He knew what he had to do. By the end of the week, he had a plan, and he had people willing to stand with him. The day the school board meeting was held, the gym was packed. Students, teachers, parents all gathered to discuss the so-called violence problem at the school. But Kyle and his friends had made sure the real story would come out. Logan sat near the front with his father, looking as smug as ever. But Kyle was not afraid. Not anymore. When the time came, he stood, holding up his phone, and played the video. The shaky footage captured everything. Logan's threats, the way he shoved Emma, the way he swung first. The gym went silent. Then chaos erupted. Parents demanded answers. Teachers looked ashamed. Students who had been too scared to speak before started to step forward. One by one, they told their stories. Logan had bullied, threatened, and hurt people for years, and now everyone knew it. Logan's smirk faded. His father's face turned red with anger. By the end of the meeting, the school board had no choice. Logan Henshaw was suspended indefinitely. As Logan was dragged out by his father, his eyes burned into Kyle's, filled with rage. "This is not over," he snarled. Kyle met his gaze unflinching. "Yes, it is." The moment they were gone, the room erupted into cheers. Kyle felt a hand clap his shoulder. He turned to see Henry, a small smile on his face. "You did not just throw punches, you won." Kyle exhaled, the weight in his chest finally lifting. Now he wanted to ask you, what would you have done in his place? Have you ever had to stand up against someone who thought they were untouchable? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories.